5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is Jen here, and you're listening to My Alien Life.
In 93, one of my best friends, Jay Slotso, owned the Crystal Theater back then. And it's a tiny little community theater that showed art movies and foreign films and that kind of stuff. And they're gone now. But and the whole building is supposedly haunted. But Jace would tell me stories like, yeah, I've got a bunch of old Life magazines down in the basement, and I'd love to show you, but I'm not going back down there. Because he'd been down there a couple times and had a run-in with some kind of ghost, scared the living crap out of him. And so he wouldn't go into the basement of his own business.
Tonight, it's all about Montana and author Ednor Therriault, who has written about the state for years. His newest book, Haunted Montana, explores things that go bump in the night and disembodied voices from the treasure state. And we talk about Montana music. That and more is coming right up on My Alien Life. My Alien Life is recorded live from atop the Northern Rocky Mountains and is available on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, and everywhere fine podcasts are found. My website is at www.myalienlifepodcast.com. There you will find my email address, all previously recorded shows, and more. I am Cameron Brower. This is My Alien Life, and the podcast starts right now.
My Alien Life Podcast.
Three, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff.
My guest tonight is from the place I plan to retire, Missoula, Montana. He's an author of a half a dozen books about Montana, and he's an award-winning musician. His newest book, Haunted Montana, is an exploration of the real Old West. And it's a pleasure to welcome Ednor Therriault to the show. Thank you so much for joining me, sir, and welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Cam. Good to be here in cyberspace.
So are you, I of course know you from your music career in Missoula and seen you several times. And, that's one of my go-to happy places. And I end up there quite a bit, and I have 2 kids going to college. Are you a native Montanan?
I'm not a native technically. I've only been here since 93 myself. I moved here from Seattle. But my dad grew up in Missoula. He's a native Missoulian, and then my family goes back to 1889 when they homesteaded in this part of the state. So kind of have deep roots, but didn't realize I belonged here until 93.
It's a good place to be, especially where you are right now. What brought you to Missoula?
I'm sorry, what brought me to Missoula?
Yeah.
It's so funny. I just was kind of writing about this on Facebook lately when I was telling the story of the guitar I have that my dad gave me. And the guitar was kind of a part of the deal that brought me here. I wound up, I made a lot of friends through a guy I met in Seattle who was from Missoula. And I would come back to Missoula with him and meet all his friends and realize this is a pretty cool town. And I was kind of burning my bridges in Seattle in the early 90s, and things were not going well. So I thought, I do have some good friends in Seattle, but maybe I should live in Missoula and visit them instead of the other way around. So I came out here, and it's the smartest thing I ever did.
So a lot of people from Missoula went to Seattle to play music. Did you play music in Seattle and then fall back into Missoula?
Oh, yeah. I was completely going upstream. what happened out there was I was kind of a middling musician, and I had played in a college band in the 80s. A lot of George Thorogood and ZZ Top and, you know, kind of butt rock, boogie stuff. And then I tried to get on with a band in Seattle, and nobody was interested in that. You had to have the torn jeans and a lot of flannel and long hair, and I didn't have any of that. I'd show up in cowboy boots and, you know, like an old Western shirt and say, hey, you guys know this old Springsteen song? And like, get the hell out of here.
But that's the, you know, cowboy boots and Western shirts right now are really the big thing in Seattle. So it's kind of done a 180 and probably will turn 360 degrees soon. But both Missoula and Seattle, fantastic places to play music. And, you know, I don't know if you've ever seen the, I think it's Experience Music Project in Seattle, but there's a lot of connections to Missoula, to Seattle, and within Missoula itself, there's musicians that have been all over the place, and the connections there are pretty extraordinary too, don't you think?
Oh yeah, agree totally. There's just a massive pipeline of people between here and Seattle that if you stay in either place for very long, you're going to meet somebody from the other end, and then you will have your own pipeline. But I have been to that EMP project in Seattle a couple of times, and I could spend the whole time out in the lobby looking at that upside down Christmas tree made out of guitars.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. You know, I think it was probably back in, I'm going to say about 1990, I was driving down Highway 93 south of Missoula, and I was heading to, we were going to go skiing. I had a friend with me, and we drove by this guy hitchhiking, and I said to my friend, I said, that's Huey Lewis. And he says, no, it's not. No, it's not. And so the friends that were behind us, as soon as we got to the hill, they go, hey, we picked up Huey Lewis and drove him to Darby. He was hitchhiking.
He was hitchhiking in the 90s? Oh, my God.
Yeah. So that's pretty amazing that he was out there on the highway and just hitchhiking. That's quite a distance from Missoula too. And I don't know,
yeah.
it's a pretty amazing thing to see a guy like that out there, but I wish we would have picked him up.
Well, he has the ranch down there now in the There.
Yeah, I just saw him. Actually, I just saw him. He just put a video together the other night for about coronavirus and was talking about that. Somebody was interviewing him, and he was in Montana, so he's, you know, a full-time resident there, and still looks pretty darn good. He was kind of one of my favorites back when I was in high school. Pretty cool guy.
Oh yeah, you couldn't go anywhere without hearing them on the radio back then.
Right.
He's pretty involved with the community. He does a lot of stuff for charities and fundraisers. I have yet to meet him, but you know, from all accounts, he's a good dude.
And he attends basketball games and of course shows and concerts and stuff. So he's everybody's pretty familiar with him there. And of course, also Jeff Ament lives there from Pearl Jam, and you know, they always joke about when he first made, you know, however much money, that was the first thing Jeff did was buy a house in Missoula and move back there. And I have seen him in the Top Hat, and had this really, I was in Seattle a few years ago, and I was driving down the street, and man, this really nice bass guitar caught my eye at a yard sale, and I pulled in there, and I got this really nice old bass, and didn't have a brand name on it. And anyway, I fixed up that in the case, and I had was going to have Jeff sign it. You know, I'd run into him like 3 times in the period of a summer, and I thought, you know, I'm down to Missoula a lot, and he's in the Top Hat. I could hit him up for that, but I never did see him again. You know, and I carried that bass around with me for like a year and never had the opportunity. But
just in case you're in Jeff.
Yeah, and I thought I absolutely would, and I didn't, and very disappointed. I finally gave it to my son for one of his birthdays, so he has that, and it's real nice.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. But
well, how about if I stop in and sign it for you?
What's that?
I'll stop in and sign it for you next time I'm up north.
So I want to talk about you're an author, and you've written books about Montana, and you know, I didn't know you had written so many. I was looking at the the new one that's coming up called Haunted Montana and due out about July, which you get a kind of a preview there in Amazon.com and you get to see a bit of it, which looks very interesting. But talk about some of your older ones, and particularly I like the one Montana Off the Beaten Path, because that's what I always take people to different places, and always trying to find something different and unusual for them to visit while they're here.
Oh yeah, that one that was a lot of fun, because there's just no end to the possibilities in a state this big. It's actually the Off the Beaten Path book. I was a reviser, so it was on like 9th edition when they contacted me and said, "Hey, we need somebody to go in and update all this stuff and make sure all the numbers are right and the websites, and make sure if the business is closed, it's taken out." So that was a lot of housekeeping, really. I did get to write maybe 8 or 10% new material, because there were things that I had discovered in my travels that I think, oh, these have got to be included in the book. So the guy had already written it. This one it's a more of a dense travel guide, but everything, it does have a lot of cool stuff in it. The title says it all. Off the Beaten Path. It's not just here's all the gateway towns to the national parks, and here's this famous thing. That stuff that practically comes on a card when you rent a vehicle at the airport. But this can take you down the 2-lane highways and into the places that only the locals know about. So I like that appeal of it.
I think one of the challenges of Montana is the size, because people will come here and they'll say, "Oh, I want to go to Glacier Park and I want to go to the Missouri River breaks." Well, that's like traveling across the Midwest or somewhere. If you're talking about places that are that far apart, and when people come and see Glacier National Park, and then they say, "I want to see Yellowstone National Park." Well, they're on opposite ends of the state. So it's really one of those things you have to actually let them know, what they're getting into before they come, because you're probably not going to get to see those, 2 things in a 4-day trip.
That's so true. So many people are just shocked, especially, when they come here from New England or the East Coast. And so, yeah, we're gonna hit Glacier, and then we'll go down and check out Butte, and then we'll stop through Yellowstone Park, and we'll be back at the hotel by happy hour.
Right.
Well, these maps are not actual size. This is it's like a long day just to get anywhere between 2 points. And once you live here long enough, it's like you say, that is something about Montana that a lot of us find appealing, because the stuff that interests me is the stuff that's in between. And the state is mostly in between.
So anybody that's ever been here will know this is true, but one of the best things, I love getting on the highway and driving down to wherever and stop at, some little watering holes in between. And it's very unlikely that you'll ever have to pay for a drink. One time I was in a bar in Butte, Montana, and literally the whole back of it was falling down. So if you looked in the back of the bar, you would see part of the ceiling on the ground. And the interesting thing about the place was the men's room was the site for where the heating came in. So if you had to use the men's room, it was probably 160, 70 degrees inside the men's room. And, over a really old furnace system that blasted out of there just to heat the whole bar. And I had happened to come back a couple years later, and I sat down and people were there was like 4 or 5 people there buying me my drinks, and I didn't buy one the last time I was there. The first time I was there was 9 of us, and we each had 3 drinks, and the bill was $27. And I know. So the second trip I was there by myself, and I was sitting there, and one of it was one bartender and one person at the bar, and they said, you look familiar. And I said, well, I'm not here, and I'm not from here. And they said, wait a minute, weren't you here like 2 years ago with 9 people or a whole group of people?
God, really?
And I said, yeah, I was. And, oh, yeah, I remember you. And there's not a lot of people in there, but I mean, it's those little small towns, and especially small towns that have one bar, you know, that's probably one of my favorite places to go ever, really.
Oh, yeah. You're always, you know, it's like, if you live in Western Montana, people have a stereotype of people from the eastern part of the state that they're aloof or they're standoffish, and that I just have found that to absolutely not be true. Everybody has a story to tell, and they're just waiting for you to come in and ask them to tell it. And that's these little bars that you're talking about. Every little town has a Stockman bar, right? So you go in there, and I wrote, my first book was called Montana Curiosities, and it's kind of roadside attractions and strange people and oddball events and things like that. Just kind of goofball stuff, weird Montana. So pretty early on, I found out that was my MO. I would go into a place like Harleton, and there's like 3 bars, and I wait till about 5 o'clock, and I go into which bar I think the ranchers go to, you know, the working guys, and I sit at the end of the bar, and I put my notebook up on the bar top, and I kind of open up my road map, and I'm looking at that, and it never failed. Within 5 minutes, somebody would amble down to my end of the bar and say, well, you're not from here. Well, what are you doing? Are you one of those TV people? And I'd say, no, I'm writing a book. I'm out here to see the 2-headed calf in the bar over down the street. And they'd say, oh, 2-headed calf. Oh, Larry's got an 8-legged lamb in his barn. And I said, let's go. So it's like every time it became the best source of information. And everybody, and it's like you say, all these little bars, they just love to show off their town to anybody who comes through and talk about what goes on there. And it's not hard to get information around the state.
Yeah, and that is, you know, even growing up, you know, I grew up in such a small town. You know, usually it had about 100 people, and you know, that was absolutely true. And even when I was, you know, in my later teens and early 20s, when I would come back, you know, and maybe I would sit in my hometown bar, and people would come in, and you know, the first thing that they would look at, you know, is us, and you know, try to size us up and try to figure out what they were really in for, you know, and
yeah.
And it was usually just a good time. And I remember a few years ago when YouTube really became popular, there was a kind of a YouTube vlogger kid, and he pulled into my hometown, and because I Googled the name of my town, and there was this one video, and this kid pulls up, and he's with his parents, and he's talking about being an internet sensation, and he's standing out in the middle of town, which there really wasn't anything. There was 2 bars, a post office, and you know, he can hardly talk because he's swatting mosquitoes, you know, at the same time, and he's trying to talk and just getting eaten by mosquitoes, and you know, and there's, you know, that part, but yeah, for the most part, it's you know, these little towns, I mean, I really don't know how a lot of them even paid for electricity or natural gas to heat the local bar, because really they didn't get much business. But then again, it's still, you know, hub of the community, that and the post office.
Yeah, that is true. That's a lot of people gather there every day, whether it's the little cafe or the bar. At the end of the day, it is kind of where they get all their local information and news and gossip and all that. It sure worked to my advantage when I was researching the ghost book. So I wanted to travel around the state, and ghost stories, this wasn't really so much that it wasn't paranormal investigations. This was just straight up, tell me your experience, your encounter with a ghost or a spirit or whatever they might call it. And if whoever I talked to didn't have a story, they knew somebody who did. So everywhere I went, in every town, somebody had a story that they could share. And some people shared the same stories. They'd experienced the same thing, even though they didn't know each other. And that to me gave a little more credence to that particular story. But they're all some people were a little more hesitant, like, you know, they didn't want to you run into this with anything that's outside the sphere of understanding that we have. So whether it's UFOs or aliens or Bigfoot or ghosts, if it's something that rattles our perception of reality, a lot of people just don't want to acknowledge it. They don't want to talk about it. But by and large, if it was a ghost sighting, the one common thread was that almost none of these ghosts that people have seen were mean or scary. They were just pretty friendly and just wanted to let them know they were there. So people tended to not be too afraid of it, but it's just an interesting thing. You just go into it with your ears and your eyes open, and you just learn all kinds of stuff.
It's called Haunted Montana: Ghosts and Strange Phenomena. Did you have an outline for that? I mean, did you have an idea or a roadmap of where you were going to go? Because again, you're going to have to cover a lot of territory to put something together like this in Montana.
Well, that's the one thing, Cam, is that I didn't for once I didn't have to make a plan. If I was working on a curiosities book or the off the beaten path, I would have to have a destination, and I would typically stumble upon things on my way to the destination. So that's how that plan worked. This plan was, well, there was something my wife and I always wanted to see, the little town of St. Marie, that's north of Glasgow. That's an abandoned town by an abandoned Air Force base, like 1,200 homes that are just empty and just standing there with no people. And it's so weird. It's like, well, we love the road. We like to road trip around Montana. So we drove out there, and every little town along the High Line or down the east part of the state, in the Badlands, we'd stop and talk to people. No matter where you were, those stories were universal. So it didn't matter. It was really more a question of, when I wrote the book, I was a little thin on ghost stories from the eastern part of the state, but that's only because the eastern part of the state is thin on people. And where there's fewer people, there's fewer ghosts. That was my theory, but I scraped up as many tales as I could from the east of the divide.
One of the things I think is highly unusual is, I've seen other books that depict the whole state of Montana, and you have to divide it up, and you have it divided up into Northwest Montana, Southwest Montana, Central Montana, Yellowstone Country, Missouri River Country, Southeast Montana. You mentioned the High Line. I mean, it's that big, and even if you're talking about Central Montana, that's another just huge area. I mean, it's not a small place. So when you talked about less people in eastern Montana, there are towns spread all over the place in eastern Montana, but maybe those towns now have 2 or 3 people, and back in the day they may have had 200 or 300, but there's still remnants there, and there's a lot of stories.
Yeah, that brings to mind Inglemark, where the Jersey Lily is. A friend of mine grew up in Sydney. He lives in Missoula now. I think he's probably 75. He's a poet and storyteller, and he is just so in love with Northeast Montana, where he grew up, that he goes back there 3-4 times a year, or he might get a gig telling stories with Humanities Montana out somewhere. And he'll, like Miles City, but he will press on and drive to Sydney so he can see his land. And he always stops at the Jersey Lily in Inglemark, and he just talks about it in such a romantic way. It's like, well, it's on Highway 12. I think it's like, well, okay, I have to go there. So I went there last summer, and you're literally 2 or 3 people living in the town. There's nothing left in the town but the Jersey Lil and a few abandoned, broken down ranches and a lot of rusted out cars and train cars. And it's just a place that used to be like a hub of sheep herding and the sheep industry. But yeah, that was 40, 50 years ago. Now all that's left is the restaurant, but it's anybody within 100 miles will come through there to go to the Jersey Lil.
So is that is that a bar restaurant? And what happened there that made it notorious?
Well, it was a saloon. Now it's a restaurant / bar. It's changed hands a few times over the last 10 years or so, but I went in there, and I guess they're famous for their beans. So I had to try the Jersey Little beans. Excuse me. And I tell you, they lived up to the hype. They were incredible.
I used to have a book. Well, I still do have it somewhere. It's called Ghost Towns of Montana, and real interesting book. And one of the things that
hardback.
Yeah, and there's several editions to that. And the town I grew up in, the one that I picked up, and I still have it, and I got to find it because it actually says in there about my town that nobody lives there anymore. Which there's about 100 people, and there always has been, but it says it's not a place that anybody intends to go to. It's just one of those places that you find on your journey between two places. And
you more stumble across it, yeah.
and then the next edition, it's not in there. So I think people probably complained from that town that it was called a ghost town, and there's still plenty of people. I mean, part of the town, yeah, definitely looks like a ghost town, but even, like you're in Missoula, and even in West Missoula, there's Garnett and other places that are the true ghost towns, and they're everywhere. Even out in the middle of a national forest, and you stumble upon, 5 or 6 buildings that people once describe as a town.
Yeah. Yeah, they're everywhere, and they all have a little bit of a live wire energy when you walk through them. I found a couple of those myself, and it's exactly like you described. It's just a cluster of buildings that have basically been reclaimed by the earth. They're not kind of collapsing into the ground. And obviously, this was something. There are water ditches dug and all kinds of stuff where you can tell, 100 years ago, a lot was going on here. But who knows what remains? You speak of Garnett. I got a magazine assignment to go there. Well, it was a few years ago. I went there in early February on like a Tuesday, and I rented one of the cabins we have there, and I stayed overnight to specifically invite the ghosts to come and visit me so I could write about my experience.
Wow.
I was the only one there, and it was like 4 feet of snow on the ground, just a super hard winter. And I had caught a ride up there with the guy who drives the trail groomer for cross-country skiers. So he dropped me off. Man, I had to meet him at like dark 30 to take this like 4-hour ride up the thing in his tractor. And he dropped me off and said, well, I'll be back in 24 hours to either pick you up or claim the body. And then he just drove off. And I said, thanks, man.
Yeah, it's an interesting spot. When I was going to the University of Montana, I became an archaeologist, but during the time that I was there at the university, we actually did a dig in Garnett, and just an interesting place. I was super fortunate to be able to spend, time in a few different places like that during my college days. But when you were moving to Montana and you were writing, and do you remember what the first Montana ghost story or haunting that you ever heard of in Montana?
Yeah, probably the first one I heard of was shortly after I got here in '93. One of my best friends, Jace Loxo, owned the Crystal Theater back then. And it's a tiny little community theater that showed art movies and foreign films and that kind of stuff. And they're gone now. But I lived with him. I rented the top half of his house, and he let me work for him at the theater. And this is in a building that's just south of the river on Higgins. And the whole building is supposedly haunted, but Jace would tell me stories like, yeah, I've got a bunch of old Life magazines down in the basement, and I'd love to show you, but I'm not going back down there. Because he'd been down there a couple times and had a run-in with some kind of ghost, scared the living crap out of him. And so he wouldn't go into the basement of his own business. But I never had an experience there myself, but that was the first one I heard of when I got to Missoula. And I mean, that wasn't long after I got here.
One of the crazier places that I got to look around. There's some old buildings in Missoula that are pretty amazing. There's actually one, I can't even think of it, but it's on Broadway, and it's a Masonic building with a Masonic lodge in the top of it, with an old big brass elevator that kind of this free hanging thing in a cage, and that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, the old school.
You know what I'm talking about?
I do. I know that building.
Yeah, that's. So I had a friend take me there, and it was just one of these times where we're downtown drinking, and here, let's go here, and the building's wide open. Went to the top in this old rickety elevator, and wow, it was like something out of a movie.
That's a place that looks like it just has to be haunted. There's just no question.
Yeah, nothing happened to us, but the other one that's just really remarkable, and they've done a lot of work on it, and it's incredible now, but it was incredible then, is the Wilma building. And in the basement it has called the Temple of the Dove, or the something like that, and a Chapel of the Dove. And I had lots of people and I've talked to people that live there, and none of them lived there very long because the place was just too eerie, especially the old apartments that used to exist in that building.
Oh, the guy that owned I don't know if he owned the whole building or just a little theater, but he was the one that, the Chapel of the Dove. That was still going when I got here.
Yeah. And I actually, when I went down there to go to college, I saw Ghostbusters that had already been out, but you walk into this little room. I mean, it's really small. It's like a small living room size. Doves everywhere. It's like a small chapel, and it's really ornate, and there's woodwork, and there's wooden benches, wooden church pews, and you sit there, and it's like you're in church in this really kind of eclectic church, and then the small movie screen drops from the ceiling, and the show starts. So that's pretty cool. Really, really neat place, and super historical, and I even heard it was very haunted. So
that's a great example of the funkiness that is just being eaten away from Missoula. I've been here almost 30 years, and it was already happening when I got here. I don't know if you spent much time in Bozeman when you were in college. We used to go up there we'd go there in the late 70s, early 80s for ball games when I was going to Idaho State. And it was still a cow town. It was a lot of fun. And people in Bozeman were starting to complain, even back then. It's like, hey, I think they're going to open an espresso stand down there on Main Street, and they're trying to turn this place into Whitefish. It's like now, it's like in Missoula, it's like, hey, they're opening a sensory deprivation parlor down there where the Crystal used to be. I think they're trying to turn us into Bozeman. So it's like you see these great Montana towns, kind of falling like dominoes, just becoming discovered, and they price out all the people who grew up here. They can't afford to live here anymore because now it's kind of the hot spot, and all the one percenters move here and get their chunk and build a barbed wire fence around it, and everybody else is out of luck.
Definitely one of my favorite places in the whole state, and I've already mentioned it, but second only to Missoula is Butte, Montana, which has the history of Butte is just it's crazy. I mean, if anybody ever came to Montana and suspected of ever having an adventure of that type in Butte, Montana, it's one of those places that has such a bad reputation. However, you go there and its reputation doesn't match anything to what reality looks like when you're in Butte, Montana, because the people there are amazing, and the architecture in that city, and it used to be a much, much bigger city. It actually used to have 7 Catholic churches in it. It's incredible, and it's still there, and you could get it for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah, it's amazing. That's one place that they viewed as such a, I'm like you, it's my second favorite town in the state. And it's such a bare knuckle town, and people that who are from Butte kind of at the same time they have a chip on their shoulder, they're also the friendliest, most loyal people you're going to meet. And it's just, I love hanging out there. I'll hang out there all day and just never run out of things to look at. And it's amazing. I just put out a book in December. It's called 7 Montana, and it's my first hardback. And it's like a coffee table book where it has a lot of photos, and I compared the 6 different regions, like the ones you mentioned earlier, the Yellowstone country and Russell country, and like each region has its own identity. So I traveled around and talked to the people and got their take on what's the culture here, what's the main business, what drives the economic engine, what is your big issue here with the environment, and everywhere is different. But we all have, the kind of the point of the book was to find out what we have in common. And so I wrote, obviously there's books and books and books written about Butte. It just has endless fascinating history. So I wrote a little bit about Butte, and I said, I've got to get a picture of the Berkeley Pit, right? So, I mean, you've been there. Where can you go where you can get the whole Berkeley Pit in your camera frame? You can't. And then my daughter came home from college, and she went out there with a friend, and she comes back, and she's showing us the photos, and like, holy crap, here's an overview of the entire city. There's the pit, there's the college, it's like, where did you get this photo? She said, well, we took the tour and went up to the Lady of the Rockies statue. And she took a photo from the foot of the statue. And it was stunning. It tells the whole story of Butte without even a word. It's just all laid out. So I asked her if I could use her photo in my book. And she said, sure. So I loaded it on my computer and zoomed in. And it just wasn't quite up to snuff. It was a little blurry. So I drove to Butte, and I paid $18 to ride in the van up this hair-raising dirt road that we all thought we were going to die. And we finally get up to the statue. I get out, and I go out on the overlook, and I took my picture, and I went back to the van. It was worth it, because it's one of my favorite shots in the whole book. But that town is, I don't know, the history is as deep as the mines are. It's just incredible.
And I really doubt that you will ever, and we talked about bars, you will ever go to a town that size anywhere in America and see that many bars. And not only are there that many bars open, there's that many bars that aren't open that are still there that, that open occasionally, and somebody decides, well, I'm going to try to make a go at this and open these bars back up in Butte. There's dozens of them that are closed, and dozens that are open, and they're everywhere. And again, they had such a variety of nationalities that inhabited the town. They still have a Greek Orthodox church there. They have all kinds of different. They have a Muslim community center there, which is still there and open. Which yeah, and it just blows my mind. I mean, there's so much there, and the people there that generations of people just still hang on to that town for dear life, and don't want to let any of it go.
Yeah, I think people are pretty good there about keeping Butte's history alive. And there's a lot of pride there, where it could easily have become like a living ghost town, but I know there's a lot. They're trying to keep things going. There's a lot always going on there, and there definitely were all these different nationalities that came from all over the world to work the mines during the heyday. They all had their very strong identity, very strong cultural identity. And one of the things I wrote about in the Curiosities book was the Finnish people have something called St. Uro's Day, which is the day before St. Patrick's Day. And there's one Finnish bar that everybody used to go to. I think it's still there. It's the Helsinki Club.
Yeah.
And so I went there on St. Uro's Day, and the place was just wall-to-wall packed. You could hardly get in there. And then they vote in the crown St. Uro and his bride, and they give him a pitchfork that has like a cricket stuck to it, a big stuffed cricket. Supposedly, St. Uro drove all the crickets out of Finland, the way that St. Patrick drove the snakes out of Ireland. So, and I found out in my research that some ad executive in Minnesota had cooked this whole thing up in the 60s. And he made it March 16th just to kind of stick it to the Irish.
And one of the things, if you go to any of these bars, and especially, and I keep mentioning those, but they're the thing, that's what's open there, open for business. Everybody that works in any of those are going to tell you ghost stories in that particular bar, and it's a shame that some of them have been kind of turned into sports bars and whatever, just to try to hang on to that business, but. Absolutely. There's, the Helsinki, the big hotel there. It's,
Finland?
Yeah, the Finland rather. And, that one is notorious for haunts. I think one of the most amazing things that I've ever been to there and only found out about it because I wanted to see the grave of Evel Knievel was the cemeteries. And, I mean, they're actually divided up into Irish portions and Italian portions of these cemeteries, and they're incredible.
Oh, so he's buried just in the city cemetery there?
He is, yeah. He's down. He's, a lot of those, what they used for headstones were these, round core samples of granite usually, and they pulled them out. And so there's a lot of these graves in these cemeteries that are just made out of a round core. And, so there's that, but, his grave is not that ornate, but, amongst, where his is placed, it's, it's the Irish part of the cemetery, and there's an Italian part of the cemetery. So Evel Knievel being Irish, he's in, amongst his people there.
Oh, they're sure proud of that hometown boy.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I've ever.
After he died.
Yeah, I don't remember when it was. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I couldn't tell you either, but they had Evel Knievel days. Oh my God, up until just a few years ago.
Yeah, that's and if you've ever been,
but
through there,
I think they. What's that?
If you've ever been through Evel Knievel days, it's an incredible thing to see. I mean, it's, I just have never been anywhere where you could see guys jumping motorcycles, a boxing match, and about 16 other things going, on in two city blocks. And it was just incredible. And it was 2 days of that, and of course they're really, really known for their St. Patrick's Day parade and everything that goes with it, which, usually I've never been to it when it had good weather. So I would love to be there in the future when it has really good weather other than, snow and cold. But it's just an incredible place. And the whole town is just sits on top of a myriad of mine shafts and sinkholes and it's a really, really, it's not a place that you'd probably build a new house.
Well, it's, we took our kids there when they were young, and they kind of caught my disease early on. Well, they will go to the out of the way places and stop and see the roadside attractions and like that. And Butte was just, endlessly interesting. Because of, like you say, the history, not just that, but what's still going on. And the last time I was through there was about a month ago. I was coming back from a reading in Bozeman, and I needed to get a photo of a particular building that I had in my head because I was designing a poster for a storytelling event there, and I wanted to get a shot of one of the ghost sign buildings in Old Uptown. And so I just spent, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours just walking around Uptown Butte, taking photos of all these old, magnificent 7, 8, 10-story brick buildings that have the old, faded out big signs on the side, and the architecture you mentioned. If you look up, that's where a lot of the interest is. The architecture. The phone company building, the fire department, the cop shop, everywhere. Just amazing. When so many other Montana mining towns have since crumbled or been bulldozed or abandoned. And Butte is man, it's one of Montana's most vital cities.
Several parts of town too with mansions that blocks of mansions that are absolutely incredible.
Oh, yeah.
And some of them are just sitting there waiting for somebody to buy up it just for nothing. And it's terribly sad to see them go, but they are making a slight comeback, and it's pretty amazing, some of those that you see.
Yeah, I'm glad to see that too. I think a few of those still they give tours of the mansion. I think it's in Butte. I know there's the one in researching the ghost book. I ran across a lot of old mansions that give tours that have the ghost of the millionaire that used to live there. And there's so many common stories that every part of the state has kind of the same version of that. But Butte is just so much its own thing. Like the Dumas brothel.
Yeah, and I don't know how many. Do you know how many brothels there were back in its peak, in its brothel peak?
I looked it up. I think there were over 100 at one point during like the hot and heavy early 20th century. It was just that town was kind of left to its own devices as far as being the Wild West. But at the same time, all the different cultures came together and created a society in Butte that was really not connected to anything else. But at the same time, it was made up of people who were connected to the rest of the world. So it's Butte is unique.
And it was literally the Wild West until the late 80s. There was still, unbelievable problems with law enforcement and the mining companies and buildings being blown up and burned down and to make way for more mining. Right.
Yeah. It was the Wild West with Arco running roughshod and the Anaconda Company before that. And excuse me. Have you seen there's a great documentary that came out about 4 or 5 years ago about Butte.
Yeah. It's
an hour long. It is good. My grandfather's in that.
Was he from Butte?
He was from Frenchtown. His name was Ednor, so he's the one I was named after. But there's a still photo of some miners who were like in the locker room after a shift, and they're all kind of hunched over and grubby and sweaty and tired, and a lot of them are looking at the camera, and he's the closest one to the camera. It's like, oh my God, Grandpa Ed. He was also a miner in Garnett. He actually lived there with his family in the 30s, which was, I think, the third and final gold boom in Garnett. But he was, kind of traveled around and trying to strike it rich and kind of a gambler. And, I think once he came to Missoula, got on with the railroad. By then, my grandmother and grandfather had 3 kids, one of them being my dad. And they got to Missoula, and suddenly she had running water and electricity and paved roads. She said, "Well, okay, we're not leaving here." So this is where they settled. She's one of the reasons I came out here too, in Seattle.
One of the most interesting things that I've seen in Butte, and they have a Butte Underground tour, and they have a speakeasy that they found by accident, which was fairly complete. But one of the other things there is the old Butte jail. And the tour is great because you get to walk in there. You do spend a bit of time there, but everybody that was ever in the Butte jail, for some reason, I've never seen anything like this anywhere else. They basically went over to the wall with a pencil, wrote their name, wrote their sentencing date, wrote what they were sentenced for, what they were convicted of, wrote a little paragraph about themselves. And it's, you could spend like 2 days in there just reading that. And,
oh my God, I never even heard about that.
Oh yeah. It's, and it's like, what's up with Butte where these convicted, whatever felons were locked up and a lot of them spent some time there. And, they just were prolific writers, I guess, in Butte and just wrote all about themselves. But most everybody did. And there's there's thousands of them. And then it makes you wonder, why there were so many people in jail, but it was a city, and I don't remember the population at its max, but it was one of the biggest cities in the western part of the United States back in the day.
It was. I think it was the biggest city between, I want to say Minneapolis and LA, or right. Minneapolis and San Francisco, and the most millionaires per capita. But then I think Helena had the same distinction at one point, the most millionaires per capita. But they were kind of all on the same program, the mining and going from coal to copper.
Yeah,
I've got to see that jail. That's just the can you tour it still?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the underground speakeasy tour, and
okay.
And the thing about the tour is that this is Butte, Montana. So if you want to deviate, and they'll talk about all kinds of stuff, and it's not really set in stone where you're going to go, but they can deviate but that the Butte, the old Butte jail, it's only accessible by an alley and this little small doorway back there that you'd never ever suspect. And the cages and I mean, they were literally cages in there, and they also had, a hole where they would put the real bad guys in there, and it's nasty. And, if you've ever been to the Montana State Old Prison, it's not even that nice. And it was open until, fairly late, it hasn't been closed that long. And
wow.
But again, the writing in there, and it's like, somebody had to actively give these guys pencils and tell them to write, or they saw writing in there and just kind of followed along. But it's pretty unique thing there to see in a that type of environment, what those men had done, so underground there in these cells, and they were damp and dark, and it's just a nasty place, really nasty.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, who would be giving prisoners, inmates pencils? I mean, you can't even have a shoelace.
Right. And they would have had go through a lot of pencils too. So, I mean, obviously they had, for some reason they had, but, again, it's a really, really unique place. And if you've ever seen, it doesn't really depict it well, the original Evel Knievel movie with, George, I can't think of his last name.
Oh God, George Hamilton.
George Hamilton playing Evel Knievel. It's hilarious, but you do get to see some of that older part of Missoula, and it's not, they didn't write it to look bad. I mean, that's exactly the way it was. And their Evel Knievel was notorious, and the local sheriff chased him around all the time, and was always, the guy was always in trouble and spent time in the jail. And that was that. There was a bunch of guys. Well, Evel Knievel got his name from some other notorious guy that they called Awful Knaffle. Anyway, his name was Robbie, or they called him Robert Knievel. So when he was in jail, when he was in jail, there was a guy named Awful Knaffle, and one of the deputies said, "Well, look who we got here. It's Evel Knievel and Awful Knaffle." So that's where the name came from, and it stuck, and just a super, super story. And there's a million different stories. There's another author that died, and I think his name was Pat Carney, that lived in Butte, and he wrote all kinds of books about Butte, and he died in 2014. So it's he was one of those people that knew all about Butte, and was such a good storyteller. And so that's why I was really glad to see, when your book came along and I heard about you, and I thought that was just a really good opportunity, and to have you on and talk about your work, because Montana is a place that is rich in history, and I hate to see it go by the wayside because of people not wanting to participate in that. So nice job. Can't wait to read your new book.
Okay. Yeah, I have a good time writing these things, and I always feel there's big responsibility to honor the people that have shared their stories, whether it's about why they built a rock house out of a cave, or why their great grandparents homesteading somewhere, or why they do the flotilla in Twin Bridges, or whatever the hell it is. It's like everybody is proud of their little corner of Montana, and I really encourage people to travel around as much as they can, because a lot of people aren't, especially out in the west part of the state, aren't interested in going past, Bozeman. Billings is like, to a lot of people, the end of the state, and it's literally halfway across the state. There's Medicine Rocks out there. There's Makoshka State Park. There's just all manner of stuff. The Charlie Russell Wildlife Preserve, I think it is, up around Fort Peck.
You bet.
It's just some incredible, breathtaking country that, holds its own against Glacier, Yellowstone, anything we have out in what I call the bumpy part of the state.
Excellent.
The people are really cool.
Yeah. It's a great place to be. It's a great place to be from. Great place to live, and so many people who grew up here and grow up here still leave Montana because sometimes there's not the right opportunity for them. But there are places here the cost of living is incredibly low, and it's an easy place to live, and you may have to live paycheck to paycheck, but the reward is there. Yeah.
I think you have to be cut from a certain cloth to really get into it too, to become a Montanan who can, not just like hunker down for the winter, but learn how to enjoy the winter and get out there in it, because it's not going away. But then the summer is kind of your reward. But I was going to ask you, you mentioned earlier that you grew up in a small town in Montana. Have you spent any time, like any length of time, living in other parts of the country or the Northwest or anywhere where you could get that perspective about your home state?
A little bit, I really wanted to move out to Seattle. Love it out there. So I spent a little bit of time there, a little bit of time in the East. And, I always come back here. It's sometimes you have to put up with a really harsh winter, and sometimes you have to put up with a really strange winter, like the one we're having right now, where we had an earthquake and then a blizzard the next day, and which that's very unusual. But I think that the spring and the summer, the fall is amazing, and right where I'm at right now, right where you are right now, there's really no better place to experience that.
Yeah, it's true. It's I've been around a lot too, and that's why I wound up coming here in '93. My dad was in the military, so I lived all over the country, including Hawaii. And who doesn't want to live in Hawaii? Sure, but I think I was 4, so I didn't have like a really good handle on what life was like. But once I was an adult and started moving around, then you start to compare places, and the entire East Coast does not appeal to me. I like the Gulf Coast of Florida, and that's about it. But it has to be out west. And then if you're going to be out west, you want to be where there's a lot of elbow room, there's not a ton of people. If you do want to find some crowds and get lost, you can go to Bozeman, go to Great Falls, even, and some of the some of the population centers things are slow there, but at least they're not. I think that's the thing. It's like the more action, the more hustle and bustle, the more transplants you're going to run across, and it's the less of the real Montana that you're seeing. Like I played a gig up in Whitefish with my band last summer, and we stayed at a nice hotel. It just had a great adventure. But it's like the town of Whitefish to me is like under glass. You know, all you got to do is drive down the road to Kalispell, and Kalispell is like a real Montana town. I think there's a huge difference between those two towns. And then you go out to Columbia Falls, you know, toward the park, and it's even realer. And that's where people just don't have any pretense. And people have lived in Columbia Falls for 3-4 generations, and they just, I found the same thing in Ekalaka. I talk to people down there. It's like, why would I ever want to leave? And I would say, well, have you ever been in Missoula? No, I never had the reason to. It doesn't appeal to me. So, you know, to each their own, and everybody's got the same love of where they live in this state. And it sounds like you do too.
I do. And, you know, I think, you know, I definitely want to live in Missoula. And I think in 4 or 5 years I'll be down there and, you know, kind of maybe split my time up a little somewhere else and travel a bit. But, you know, everything that I've ever wanted is there. I mean, if you want a place to go where there's lots of live music, it's there. Interesting places to eat and drink. Places that have been there a very, very long time that haven't changed much, that are still fun. And, you have the newer influx of ideas and culture of the college students that are there, because the university is amazing and fantastic football and basketball, you know, right there if you're into sports and you know, there's not many places in America that have that is that small. And I'm not saying that it's small, but with 3 major good-sized concert venues right in the middle of it, you know, and they're only, you know, as the crow flies, maybe 2-3 miles apart. And there's that. And if you're into that, there's probably not a better place, you know, unless you were in Austin or Nashville or somewhere like that. And then you have to kind of contend with, you know, other environmental factors there and things like that, because it's a bit hot. But you know, Missoula, Montana in the summer, there's no place better, I don't think. On that subject, I gotta hand it to Nick Chakota for doing these things, putting so much into them and doing them right. And you know, you've been to shows at the Wilma since they remodeled, and it's kind of a convertible space now, and you can have a bunch of tables and stuff down on the floor to have kind of a more elegant, intimate thing, or you can empty the whole thing and have a big rock show. And then there's the amphitheater. I finally made it out there last year to a show, and man, every little detail was pretty well thought out. And the guy he's just not new to this business, and I think he's working on one in Bozeman now, I think. Venue. Yeah, they're doing.
But
something.
it is one of the things that's added so much to the town that how can you find a way to complain about that? You know, it is really a good mix of old school and new school, and a lot of people are transplants, but they brought something really good with them without wrecking what was already here. So that's the kind of stuff that, you know, it sounds like you see it, Cam, and like why you want to live here, because you seek that out and you can have a great life here and take advantage of all the great stuff without having to complain about, oh, it's not the same Missoula it was in the 70s. And like, well, yeah, in some ways, you know, thank God. Like the Top Hat was a dive, and I'm a fan of dive bars. It had completely fallen apart, and the owner was an asshole, and you know, they never got good music in there. But you know, when the new guy took over, it's like, oh my God, I hope he doesn't turn into a fern bar, and it's all brass and glass. And like, well, no, they have what's the James Bar? That's what that place is. Yeah. So those people have their bar, and the rest of us can have the Top Hat, and the food is great. And I'm just really impressed as a musician, the sound system they put in and the lights, and you can have all that, and if you don't have somebody who knows how to work it all, it's pointless. But they've had a couple of really knowledgeable, expert sound people working the board since they did that, and that's as a musician, as you go in, that's the first one you make sense of, is the sound guy. Did you ever? And make sure they know.
I'm thinking I saw you first, but it seems like too long ago, maybe at the Union Club. But did you play there much?
Oh yeah, that's where my first real successful band here is the Fence Menders, and we were together for 9 years. And I would say, well, probably the bulk of that time, the Union Club was kind of our home base. And I think we probably peaked right around 2000, late 90s into 2000, and we were being voted the best local band, a couple, 3 years in a row. And we'd play there on a Saturday night, and you could count on it being packed. And I appreciate that we had that kind of our day in the sun, and we had so much fun. And I look around and thought, why aren't other bands doing what we're doing? It's so simple. We just involve the crowd, and we have like games and giveaways and weird stuff. And, we were just a rock and roll band playing country material. And we certainly didn't invent that. I was a big fan of Jason and the Scorchers, and they're the ones that kind of was the first band to explode with that punk attitude that's playing a Hank Williams song. Excuse me. So we just kind of did that and made sure everything that we played was danceable. So that the Union Club, that's where everybody would go to dance, and they were just kind of the right thing at the right time. And they do still have, it's one of the few places left that you can count on to have live music in Missoula. And so many stages have closed down.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is, I saw a lot of really, really good bands that, were going to make it, somewhere else. And there was always a couple guys in those bands who wanted to come back to Missoula, Montana, and, they would go out and they'd be gone like a couple years. And then like two of the guys in whatever band would be back, and they'd start up some other band in Missoula. They just wanted to come back, and
oh yeah,
I can see
people
why.
You probably know people who live here who are talented enough they could get a foothold in Austin or Nashville or even Portland. I think there's a bigger musical pipeline between Missoula and Portland almost than Seattle.
Yeah.
But there are people like, say, Tom Catmull, who's like, no, man, this is where I'm raising my kids.
Yep.
This is where I'm making my life. He was a thriving musician from Texas when he moved here about shortly after I did. And the same thing. You look around, it's like, oh my God, why would I want to live anywhere else? This is the place. And it's small enough where you can kind of invent yourself and get noticed if you're doing some quality work. I tried to do that in Seattle, and man, it's like the scene there in the late 80s, early 90s was very competitive and backbiting and jealous and hard to even make friends in the scene, unless you knew somebody. Everybody was climbing all over each other to be the next big thing when the drugs started to explode. But I come out here to Missoula, and people are like, oh, so you like playing like Johnny Cash? Here, let me give you the number of Ken, because he's a bass player. And, why don't you come down to the Union Club Saturday night? They're having a jam session, and everybody is just welcoming with open arms in Missoula, because nobody comes here to make it. You come here to live.
Yeah, and it's not easy at times. I certainly see bands there that one of the things I think it's probably not unique, but I think it's unique to me because I don't know much about that is, you'll see a band and they're well established, and then you'll see, half of that band in another band the next night, the next big show you go to there, and they may be in 3 different bands and they make it work.
That's it right there, man. There's a lot of inbreeding going on. If you're a drummer or a bass player, you are going to be in 3 bands, minimum. Because guitar players were like my buddy says, 10 cents for 12.
Yeah, it's really would be. I would love it, and I think it would be an incredible world, especially even more so if we could get these musicians some pay that they deserve, because I would love to see a lot of them be able to do that full time and what they could create once they're doing that for a living, because it's hard. I mean, wow. I have friends there that have been in bands since I was there in 1984, and they were in bands in maybe in 1980, and they're still going strong and trying to do it. But it's one of the harder things in life to do, and that's why you don't see 50,000 really good bands out there. It's unfortunately not everybody can make money doing it.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's over the years, it's kind of gone up and down, the music scene and the health of it. And sometimes it's there's nothing in town but punk bands, or there's nothing in town but bluegrass. That's kind of the thing lately. And now it's like, well, there's a million bands, but we have nowhere to play.
Right.
And it's like between the top hat and a brewery, where are all the places in between? Where, say, a band that's ready to come up out of the basement, where are they going to get their start? There's no more Palace. There's no more Elks. There's no Stage 112, whatever they're calling it. Where just any, they would have 3 local bands in a night. And I think there's like a BSW now where you can play in front of the bingo board, in the back of the bar. It's just all these little tiny venues that I don't think it's anywhere better anywhere in the state. It's all kind of like the bulldoze a bar and build a casino or a coffee shop or a brewery, and it's that has shifted now to where now all the gigs are at breweries where you play from 6 to 8, and a lot of times you're only playing for tips, or they might pay you $40. But I have friends who do this for a living, and it's all they do. They don't have a day job, or quote day job, so they will drive from Missoula to Helena and drive back and have made like $70. And had to sleep in the car or crash with a friend or do whatever. And these are like people in their 50s who have families. And it's like, well, it's obviously the love of music that is driving them to go to those lengths just to make a little bit of money. And they're getting lessons and playing 3 gigs a week. And I'm just, I'm old and tired. I'm not going to do that anymore.
I wanted to bring up that you have a website, more than one, and can you let everybody know listening where to find your website and what's there, and where to find your books?
Oh, right on. Yeah, thanks for reminding me. The website is ednor.com, EDNOR, and I've just kind of rebuilt it and resurrected it, and it's going to be the home of all my music stuff as well. But you can get the book information there, and you can go on there, see what I'm about, see what my books are about, and I think there's a button where you can buy the books. I'm learning how to do this, still can. But and then I have a Facebook page, Bob Wire Music. I think it's facebook.com/BobWire. Yeah, music. And then Facebook.com Ednor Writes. I have a Twitter, Bob_Wire. That's the one where if I'm doing something online with Bob Wire, that's kind of Ednor's id, where I will say things unfiltered. I will say things everybody's thinking, but nobody wants to say out loud. But Ednor, my real person, I try to kind of be a little more diplomatic and maybe sociable and reasonable and mature. Not that I always succeed at that.
Why do you want to do that?
I don't know. Sometimes it's like Ednor is the one with the checkbook, and Bob Wire is the one that runs his mouth. Let me put it that way. But yeah, it's Facebook's kind of where I'm doing a lot of stuff right now. But the website is getting bigger and more interesting every day. So ednor.com, where you can find out about all the books. 7 Montanas is out right now. I've written one came out last year called Myths and Legends of Yellowstone. There's a chapter in there about Bigfoot in Yellowstone Park, and that was an interesting trip. Yeah. But you can find out about that book on the website as well.
And the new book coming up, Haunted Montana: Ghosts and Strange Phenomena in the Treasure State, and that's available coming up this summer. So something to look forward to. Ednor Therriault has been my guest, and Sir, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Finally, nice to meet you, and I've known you always as Bob Wire, and it's nice to know the other half and to discover some interesting writing. So thank you so much.
Hey, it's been great talking with you, Cam. Thanks a lot. Hope to see you here in Missoula sometime.
I'll be there.
My Alien Life Podcast.
You can find my website at www.myalienlifepodcast.com, and please subscribe to my latest downloads at iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and at podbean.com. And please follow me and like me on Facebook and Twitter. My Alien Life is written and produced for broadcast at Studio 254 in the Northern Rocky Mountains. The music you are hearing is produced and created by Elion. You can find all Elion's work online at Heart Dance Records.